My name is Holly Carroll. I'm a biologist with a passion for the great apes. But they're all endangered, and we're losing them much too fast.
This forest lost forever.
And I wanted people to see for themselves what's happening.
How amazing is this?
With a film crew, I traveled to some of the world's most remote forests to be the first to film all the apes in 3D in the wild.
Looks like the plane's stuck.
It was a daunting and sometimes perilous adventure, but always rewarding. Come with me now for a behind-the-scenes trip of a lifetime as I go walking with the great apes. This guy's a mountain gorilla. He's a majestic animal that lives only in the Virunga. Okay, so he clearly was done with that pace to camera. The mountain gorilla is one of the rarest of the great apes. There are less than 1,000 left in the world. We didn't know it at the time, but carrying the gear up the steps on the boat was only a hint of the many climbs to come. We're headed to the other side of Lake Kivu, to the Virunga volcano chain, which spans Uganda, Rwanda, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. These are the only 3 countries where mountain gorillas live. One of my heroes, the late Dian Fossey, began the first long-term study of mountain gorillas here way back in 1967. This is definitely not your usual drive down the highway. We had to drive so slow, even the kids could keep up with us.
Driving up the worst road I've ever been on in my whole life, but it's worth it because we're going to see mountain gorillas. And the driver's on the phone.
We hired porters to help with our gear and begin the long hike up the mountain and into Virunga National Park. The gorillas live in a remote place, but I was amazed at how many fields we had to walk through to get to the park boundary. It seemed like every inch of land outside the park was cultivated. The first part of the hike seemed easy enough, but it was not without its hazards.
Oh God, okay. What you see here are one of the nastiest things in this forest. They're called army ants. They climb up in your pants and they bite you in the middle and they don't stop until you get them off you, which is not easy to do because they're inside your pants. I know people think they should be afraid of gorillas. Gorillas don't scare me. These nasty things scare me.
Camera cameraman Mike always managed to get ahead of us somehow and capture the moment with energy to spare for jokes and a smile.
This is just the way to the car park. Or in the day's work. It's done. Like a kid again.
After all the walking, the crew was pretty excited to get the camera out and do some filming. But it turned out the gorillas were even more excited to see us. You're supposed to stay 7 meters from the gorillas, but try telling that to them. The ranger told us off for letting the gorillas get so close, and though we felt guilty, we were mesmerized. Once we moved back the safe distance, the gorillas got bored and moved off to do what they normally do. Visitors are only allowed 1 hour per day with the gorillas, and we were no different. So the 3D crew didn't waste a minute. Gorillas are so closely related to us, and watching them, you feel that kinship. Like us, gorillas play and laugh when they're having fun. As I sat there so close to them, I can only imagine how Dian Fossey must have felt with her gorilla group. They had accepted her presence as if she was part of their family. The silverback has many wives, and with this many females, there's bound to be a few squabbles. But he's a peacekeeper when necessary, maintaining harmony in the family. Once everyone is full, there's usually a bit of yoga, a bit of napping, and lots of quality family time. Always under the watchful gaze and protection of the silverback. So we've just finished our time with the gorillas, and it was beyond expectation. I mean, seeing them so close and then having them choose to come in and around us, seeing the interactions between them, I mean, it was amazing. I mean, I've seen other gorillas, but it just never stops being magical. Sadly, not everybody finds gorillas quite as magical. Rapidly expanding human population is putting great pressure on the wildlife. And when people in a poor country need food, often they see poaching as the only way to get it. A ranger shows me a room full of the frightening weapons and traps they have taken from poachers in the park.
From poachers. This, for example, is for elephants.
Oh my God. So they step on this.
Yeah.
The rangers took me on patrol to see for myself how insidious the threats were to the gorillas. And to the rangers themselves. In this dense undergrowth, how would a gorilla even notice one of these? They are long, tiring, and dangerous days for these underpaid and overworked guys. But they do it for the gorillas. I could barely see the snare, and I was looking for it. Imagine how easy it would be for a young gorilla to get caught up in one of these.
The gorilla move. He puts the head on and trap baby gorilla.
Lambert explains how this type of snare works. An animal walks into it. It wraps around their leg. Often they can lose a limb, or worse, they can die from these injuries. Very bad thing. Kiboko is one of the lucky ones. He was found by rangers and rescued, and he's now living in a sanctuary at the park headquarters. It's the only place in the world where there are captive mountain gorillas. There are 4 orphans here, and they can't be released back into the forest until they are mature adults. For now, they play together. When the time comes to release them, they will go as a group, which will give them the best possible chance for survival.
We were already leaving to go to Rwanda this morning, but they were really rushing us out of the hotel, which I couldn't understand because we hadn't had breakfast yet. Turns out all the foreigners being evacuated from here because there's a wanted man from, I think, the Congolese army who is currently taking up residence in this area, and he's very dangerous.
It turns out his name is General Bosco, nicknamed the Terminator, and he had 1,000 rebels with him. As we left, I wondered if everyone had to evacuate, who would protect the gorillas, particularly the orphans? How ironic that we too were being evacuated to Rwanda, just like Diane 50 years ago. I have booked into the very room that Diane always stayed in when she came down from her research site up in the nearby mountains. The hotel doesn't seem particularly special, but she's well remembered here. And even though she was killed in 1985, I feel like I'm getting closer to her somehow. I was eager to meet with Ian Redmond, one of Diane's favorite researchers, who would take me to her old camp and gravesite. On the way, we met with Francois, a former poacher who used to hunt in the area where Diane and Ian worked. Francois explains he's now working with cooperatives which use conservation projects to bring better income to people in the region. Back in the 70s, Diane's anti-poaching army disabled hundreds of snares, and Ian and Francois were on opposite sides of a war in the forest.
Yeah, I'd like to meet your father. not to apologize, but just to say, you know, old enemies can become friends.
Wow. So today is the day that Ian Redmond was going to take me to Dian Fossey's grave, but in this rain, I don't know if we can still do it.
The government only gave us a permit for one day to film at Diane's grave, and this was it.
This could ruin everything, really.
The crew were dejected, as the 3D camera is not built to handle rain like this. But we'd come too far to give up, so we started the 2-mile hike uphill in the hopes that the weather would clear up eventually.
On this soggy mountain, flying to
Hiking up to Mount Karasoke, to Karasoke Camp, to see Diane's grave and pay homage to her.
I finally figured out what that staff they handed me was for.
We're only just beginning this walk.
I felt really sorry for the porters having to carry all that heavy equipment up this treacherous trail.
Well, we're most of the way there, it sounds like, thank God. It's been a pretty steep hike, which would be fine, but the nettles were stinging through my pants. So I feel like I have 3rd-degree burns on my shins. Other than that, it's a good workout.
I was definitely struggling with the hike and the rain, and I was worried that we wouldn't get the shots we needed for the film. But I had to remember what this must be like for Ian. To come back to this place he called home for years, where his friend Diane and beloved gorillas were murdered and buried.
And in some ways, it's a very sad place. And it sort of epitomized what Diane feared, that the mountain gorillas might become extinct in the same century that they were discovered in. But
But they haven't.
they haven't. Thanks to Diane and all those who followed and continue her work, they've not just survived, they've flourished. And every year there are more than there were the year before, which is pretty amazing, really. So, cantankerous old Fossey did it. But you could hardly wish for a more beautiful place to be buried.
Strip.
Surrounded by agania trees and gorillas living their lives.
It had been a brief reprieve from the rain, But somehow it seemed fitting for the misty final resting place of my hero.
Probably down here is the place that
It was a long, exhausting, emotional day. But to be able to visit the volcanoes and pay respect to such an inspirational woman was a gift. Because of Dian's work, tourists like me get to have the unforgettable experience of walking with the mountain gorillas. All of the great apes are endangered, but because of the daring anti-poaching patrols pioneered by Dian Fossey, the mountain gorilla population is the only one on the increase. Theirs is a success story, and she did not die in vain. These are the descendants of the gorillas that the late Dian Fossey studied. And though she didn't get to meet them because of her untimely death, her legacy lives on because they're now protected in this park.